All right, guys, welcome back to the show. Today we got a different type of guest. It's whiskey adjacent, but we have Brandon with CNC Malt, and he's going to talk to us about their story, obviously, and he's going to talk to us about malting, different types of grain, obviously, and also kind of give us his cool little setup, a little rundown of their cool little setup over there. Without further ado, here's Brandon.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for taking the time there to watch and listen. And I hope this is educational and informative. Yeah, as Randall was saying there, we got a malt house here. And the way we came about it was through purchasing an old elementary school. Kind of a long story to get there, but it works out to be the perfect malting facility. And the reason being is we have a lot of floor space. So it's one level facility that just has miles and miles of concrete floor, not literally, but sometimes it feels like that when we're turning the grain. And that floor is the perfect bed for germinating, which is the bulk of the malting process.
That's awesome. That is awesome.
It's kind of the heart of it. So we're starting in the middle there talking about germination. Um, yeah, as far as the process goes, it's there's three main processes in malting. There's steep, there's germination, and there's kilning. So steep being the first one is really the most important, most critical of all the processes. You want to get the moisture just right, and you can't be underwater too long or you'll drown the grain. So it's a little bit of a process to kind of tweak it and play with it and find out what's just right. And when it comes out, if the grain's all chitted, which means it starts to sprout, you have good chit, then you're off to a good start. So that's where we start. Bulk of it is germination. So when it comes out of the steep tank, after it's up moisture and chitting, we take it, spread it out on the floor, and get it to grow. So what that entails is turning it multiple times in the day, about 4 to 6 times, depending if it's summer or winter. And that helps aerate the grain and keep it from growing together because it'll all mat up and those roots just want to like intertwine and makes malt balls that you have to bust up. Um, it also helps to cool it. So when you're doing that, it removes the heat and it gets some air in there to help it keep growing. So it's about 4 or 5 days on the floor there, and when we're turning it, we'll watch how it progresses. So the main thing you want to do if you want to try malting at home, this is something everyone should do just for fun. You take the seeds and kind of pull them apart, and you'll look and see. In barley, it has a husk, so it's covered, and you can see the plant growing up through the inside of that husk. And when that plant's about full length, you're done. The other thing you do is you rub it out and see if you leave like a chalky paste behind on your fingers. And that's a good indication that it's done. If it balls up, then there's a lot of proteins there and stuff. It's still kind of gooey, sticky. So you want to let it go the longer for them to break down. Then once you're through that process, then you transfer it over to the kiln, and that's where you dry it. So if you're to try it at home, you might spread it out on a baking tin, put it out in the sun or in an oven, low temperature, like 120 degrees is ideal. What we do is we put it in, we built a big stainless box and with the a false bottom. If our connection was better, I'd walk you back there and kind of show you, but we're having trouble enough just sitting still here. So
Yes, sir.
basically, there's that false bottom allows the air to come up from underneath. So basically, the deck's there is about a 4 foot air plenum to allow the air to equalize underneath it. Then the air blows up through the grain and pulls off the moisture. It's vented outside. There's a it depends what kind of malt you're making. There's a couple different steps in kilning, but pretty much the first is we just driving off all the moisture that you can, and that's done at low temperatures, about 120 degrees. That helps preserve the enzymes. Then once you start seeing that temperature of your air off start to rise, when it gets up about 10 degrees of the air on, you start ramping it up. You get up to about 185 or so and hold it there for most malts, standard malt. And that's kind of where you help develop some of the flavor, dry it further, things of that nature. And then when it's done, you cool it down. After that, then you clean it up, and it's more similar to other grain processes, kind of at both ends of the spectrum before you steep and after you kill them. Those two ends of malting are similar to something that might be done in other grain silos and other facilities of that nature. So that's the nickel explanation on malting.
Okay, awesome. Well, okay, so I guess kind of tell us your personal backstory and what got you into the malting house. And did you come from a brewing background? Did, any of that? And even if you came from a tech world or whatever, just kind of give us a little bit of your backstory and what made you want to do this whole malting thing.
Yeah, sure. So my background's oil and gas, and that's where most maltsters come from.
Okay.
I'm just joking on that. But so I had a job where I was working a lot, never at home, didn't know what the kids looked like. And basically, it was a take it or leave it offer to move out to Colorado. And I decided to leave that job behind. And it was really nice because it went from a very intense job to just watching kids, but it's also frustrating too because you can't fire your kids when they don't listen to you. They just run around and do what they do. So it was kind of a unique situation where I had time and money, and I needed to do something. After a while, I just figured I need to either go back to work or do something for myself, and I wanted to do something for myself. So I had considered starting a brewery. That's what led me down this path to malting. We had a good bit of equipment sitting in our garage, and so I figured there's really not much risk here. It's something I always wanted to do. Now's probably the time. It just seemed there was already 8 breweries in the Pittsburgh area, and that seemed like too many. And I was thinking, now what could I do to differentiate myself from other breweries so people come to visit? And I was searching for some equipment. I came across some malting equipment. That's when the light bulb came on. I said, aha, I can make my own malts. That'll give me more control in the process, give people a reason to come out, visit our brewery. So in the meantime, I figured it'd be good to try some Pennsylvania malt, see what flavors it has to offer and just what exactly we'd be getting into. And I searched for Pennsylvania malt and there wasn't any. And then the second light bulb came on. I said, well, there you go. You don't have to be dealing with drunk people at 10 at night, kicking them out, or 2 in the morning whenever you decide to close down. You could just make malt, visit all the breweries, and go home at the end of the day.
Right.
So instead of dealing with drunk people at 2 in the morning, I'm turning 2 in the morning.
Yeah.
But that was kind of the path that led me there. And then at that point, you got to make the malt somewhere. And we have about 5 acres where our house is. It's zoned agriculture, and it met all the criteria to put up a building with malting's considered an agribusiness. So you're not quite farming, but you kind of are because you're growing stuff, but you're really more manufacturing. So it's a gray area. So being that it's a gray area, it led into some difficulties dealing with zoning boards and all the different entities involved in my local township. In the meantime, this elementary school came up for sale, and out here there's no zoning, no it's a very welcoming community, so it just worked out perfect to move out into this old elementary school, which it's not when you say elementary school, people have different visions, whether it's a one room schoolhouse with the wooden siding, or what we have is one of those brick buildings built in the 50s, about 30,000 square foot total, 1 level, out in the country, so well and septic, works quite well for what we're doing.
Awesome. Awesome. So I guess my next question is, okay, so I wrote this down. can you malt any grain as long as it's a grain?
Could you say that one more time?
No, no, it's all
Can
right.
you?
Can you malt any grain?
Yeah, we could malt pretty much any grain, people or seed. People have malted hemp seeds. They've malted pretty much so long as you get it to germinate, it would malt. So I suppose you could try apple seeds. They probably wouldn't be good. So
Yeah.
um, we malt various grains. So we do malt corn and some uh, obviously traditional grains like barley, wheat, and rye, and they all have their different challenges. Oats is a grain that we malt often, spelts, things of that nature. When you get into some off the wall kind of grains, they might be a little more challenging because you want everything to be pretty uniform. So even outside of barley, it's a bit of trial and error to see what varieties of rye or wheat or corn for that matter malt well. So it's barley's been bred over the years to be very uniform so that you have 70 to 100% of all your grain is chitted at coming out of steep. Day one, two, three, they're very uniform in growth. With corn, you might have 20% to 50% chitted out of steep, and then when you're going to kiln, some of it's a little more than full length there. And the corn, you get one root that comes down, and that'll be about 3 times the length of the corn kernel. So you might have one that's fully grown like that, and then you'll have others that are just starting to chit. So it's more challenging as you get away from the grains that have really been the focus of malting.
Got it. Got it. That makes a lot of sense because, like, most people, like with malted corn, especially where people are just now getting into malting corn and doing stuff like that. So you have more of a learning curve, whereas they've been malting barley for a long time, and you kind of know the basis of the barley. So that kind of leads me into my second question. What is the strangest thing that you have malted?
Oh, we did sorghum for this African beer, and that was unusual. The very first thing we tried to malt was einkorn, and that was probably one we've only lost maybe 2 or 3 batches total, all on the pilot scale. That was one that we lost, and it was not the right place to start, but live and learn. So the problem with the einkorn was the kernels were just so small and sticky that they kind of made it was very difficult to aerate the grain. So it kind of cooked itself. So the one grain that we malt regularly that's a very challenging grain to malt is rye, and it's challenging in regards to its stickiness. So it sticks to your shoes. It's you have to watch you don't clog up your kiln grates. You have to get in and rake out the kiln during the kilning process to get it drying evenly. So it's a challenging grain to malt, and that's almost what we do the most of. So
Of
Bellevue.
course. Of course, right? The hardest one is going to be the one that you do the most of. Okay, so
Actually, you know what? Thinking back on it, I guess the most challenging one was spelts. Spelts with the hole on, and the problem is they float out of the steep tank. You have to put a burlap sack over them and cinder blocks to get them to sink down so they don't float. So we learned our lesson on that one, and we malt de-holed spelts now, which took some time to find. Anything's doable, just takes a little bit of trial and error.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's get a little nerdy and tell me or us, like when you're malting the grain and it's on the drying floor and it's getting its little things. Let's go into when do you know it's ready to be taken off and thrown in the dryer.
So that's the part.
Go ahead.
That's the part that becomes a bit of an art as much as a science. So a lot of the other tests are more absolute. You're looking for a number. Coming off of the floor, you're doing the rub test really is, and we talked a little bit about that earlier. So if we talk about barley in particular, because that's a traditional multigrain, it has there's a I usually have some at least in my pocket or shoes I can pull out to show you, but there's kernel, and then out of the bottom the roots are growing, and then out of the top is where the plant would grow. So, but that is hidden by the husk. So what you do is you look at it, and there'll be a crease in the barley seed, and the opposite end of that is where the plant grows. So you kind of find the crease, roll it over, and then get your fingernails and pull it apart, and you look to see how that accuspire is doing. So if you were to do a more formal test and track for QC purposes in your lab, if you had a dedicated lab guy, you might do this. You would take a representative sample of barley corns across the floor and take those into the labs, slice them open, and rank what percentage of them are at what length. So you're looking for them to be mostly in the 3/4 to full length of the kernel. So that would be the one approach. The approach that's very typical that almost all maltsters use is the rub test. So you just peel back that husk, you'll get that white endosperm, and then just in between your thumb and your finger, you rub that barley out of its husk and then see how it rubs out. And then you'll end up with a white thumb. Where I'm coming back from Thanksgiving, so I have no white thumb today. But basically, you'll rub the grains in a few places throughout the floor and see how uniform it is. If they all rub out, then it's good to go. And then if they don't, then you try and give it more time. Try and might need heat. It needs some moisture, so you kind of baby it along till it gets there.
Got it. Got it. So I guess this is kind of a specialty question, but when you do your malting, do you also do like the caramelization, like a crystal malt or something like that, or hybridize any malts, or are you specifically a malting house and not a breeding house?
No, so we made crystal oats and crystal rye and honey malts and all kinds of different stuff, and roasted malts. And so there's a couple of different groups of malts. So when you talk about a crystal malt, uh, what you're basically doing is taking either a green malt that hasn't been kilned or a finished malt and rehydrating it to about 40% and then putting that in a roaster. And so what you're doing in the roaster, you're going to bring it up to 150 and hold it for about an hour. And in the roaster, that high moisture is allows the enzymes to be active in the grain and convert the starches to sugars. So essentially, you're mashing in the grain. And then after that mash is complete, then you'll raise up your temperature in the roaster and kick on some fans to blow off the moisture that's there. And depending on what temperatures you get to and how long you stay there, you'll get different caramelization taking place. So crystal malts, caramel malts are the same family. And that's kind of the broad overview of it. And everyone has their little tweaks to how they make their malts, whether it's their starting point or the way in which they heat their kiln, the ramp they take up to get different their particular different crystals. So that's the crystallization portion of it, caramelization, and we do that on a smaller scale. So but honey malts are quite fun. They're actually my favorite to make, and that's a different animal in itself. So what we do is we take green malt that would go to the kiln, and it needs to have slightly higher moisture, about better than 40%. And you'll put it into a Kraft box, is what the Germans call it, I believe. Basically, they're very particular about their dimensions, but we have these stainless boxes that maybe I shouldn't give out my dimensions because I think ours is pretty good. Um, but they're about 3 feet by 2 feet by 2 feet or so. So we fill those up with the green malt, and then we cover them in saran wrap. And what happens is you get a temperature spike in there because anytime you have compact wet grain, the temperature tends to climb. So there's a lot of biological activity, and it'll get that temperature up to about 120. So you start saccharification, you start making some sugars. Then it crashes and goes anaerobic or aerobic, the one without oxygen. Which one's that? Anaerobic.
Yeah.
So, um, so at that point, you have some sugars there. There's yeast present on the malt. You start making some alcohols. There's bacteria present. You start souring. So you get like the sweet and sour malt that is really, really interesting. And when you kiln it, like that initial aroma of kilning is amazing. It smells like the four shots of a stills. You're getting ethers and esters, all kinds of stuff coming off. It just makes the whole malt house smell great. So I think as far as a hybridized malt, that might be the closest thing because there's some caramelization, get some color to it, but it kind of ends up about a Munich malt color. And something that's quite intense in flavor. And if you put that in a spirit, that gets real intense real fast. There's a honey rye we made that I'm really looking forward to see how that came out.
Yeah,
That went into.
go ahead.
I was just saying that went into a rye whiskey. I guess I left that part out.
So I guess my next question is one that's more based upon our listeners, just so for their thing. Since you're into malting and into grains and stuff like that, what is your favorite whiskey out there? Kind of give us a little background on that.
Well, that's a good question, and there's a lot that I haven't tried. So I was looking at some of the bottles behind you. Um, there's a couple moonshiners around here that really make good whiskey. So my current favorite one in my liquor cabinet's a bottle from a neighbor. It was made out of it's a bourbon. He made it using malted green corn, and everything was malted. So I guess that might qualify as an American single malt, even though it's a bourbon. Not sure how that classification is going to play out, but that's one of my favorite. We have some old bottles like pre-World War II of Canadian Club that have been sitting there that I intend to open and see how they are. But yeah, there's some good bourbons and ryes around. Altered State is putting out some good ones up our way. I'm looking forward to see what Iron City puts out. Haven't had they're still young yet. But yeah, there's some good ones. I do prefer single malts and bourbons to rye. I was kind of a rye fan for a while, but that's um I think I'm maybe back to bourbon. I don't know.
That's really hard. Once you find your niche in whiskey, you kind of don't want to delineate from that. You're just like, man, I really like single malt. I really like American single malt, whatever, and you don't want to really go off the path. But then you're like, man, that was a really good bourbon that guy had too. So you kind of get thrown out there. So yeah, I totally understand. I totally understand. Okay, so give us a day in the life um, of a malter. Like, you have different stages throughout the malting house? Is that correct?
Correct. So when we are at full production, we'll have something on the floor. There'll be something in steep and there'll be something in kiln. And that'll probably be one of those would be getting changed over. Either the kiln would be finished up and getting emptied, or the steep will get finished up and get emptied, or we'll be filling it. One of those. So the when there's grain on the floor, typically it's turned for the first time around 6 in the morning. There's a retired guy lives close by, likes to come in and do the early shift, so that's great. The grain on the floor get turned again around noon, around 6 in the evening, and around midnight. So when it's cooler out, try and pull that midnight turning back to about 10, because that 10 to 8 or 10 to 6 is not a bad stretch. That's only 8 hours. When it's hot out, then we add in additional turnings. So that midnight one's usually the latest, and the 6 in the morning's usually the earliest. So that's germination, and that's the one. It doesn't take long to turn the grain. It's about 15 minutes, but it's 15 to 20 minutes 4 times a day. And
Right.
if you have, yeah, if there's 2 batches going, then you have a half hour to 40 minutes 4 times a day. So that's usually something that always kind of happens while other things happen. So if there's a batch, like this morning we loaded the kiln, we're just getting going, or not the kiln, excuse me, the steep tank. We're just getting going again, steeping. So that was loaded about 8:30. We'll unload that about 4:30, 5 o'clock, somewhere in there, and it'll go back underwater around 5, 6 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock in the morning, depending on the day. So when you get into weekends, that kind of shifts things around a little. It should still happen at certain times, but it doesn't always, just depending on how the weekend goes. So once the steep's back underwater, so steep's kind of critical. So you always kind of start by checking on that, make sure that there's a couple things that could happen. We overflow our steep while it's under, and that helps all the straw and stuff like that get washed away. If the place that the water's going to gets clogged, then the steep tank overflows and water spills on the ground, and you have a big mess. So you always start by making sure you don't have a big mess. And sometimes you do, most of the time you don't. Um, the If our kiln's going, our kiln runs on wood pellets, and if the wood pellets get too low, the fire burns back towards the hopper and smoke fills the building, and the fire alarms go off and the fire department comes. So after you check the steep tank, then you go and check and make sure there's pellets in the wood stove and fill them up. Then kind of check the temperatures on the kiln, see where it's at, make sure it's doing what it's doing. Then we go up and we climb into the kiln, scan it with an IR gun, make sure the temperatures are level throughout the kiln bed. If they're not, you have to rake from the cool spots to the warm spots to kind of level out that kiln and keep the airflow even. And then that's what you do when everything's humming. If we're loading the kiln, then that would be we would be shoveling grain off the floor into a cart and taking that cart over to a conveyor belt and putting it into the kiln and spreading it around. So that's the most labor intensive job that we do, is loading the kiln. And then if we're unloading the kiln, then we set up a debearder machine to knock the roots off, and we'll shovel the grain, the malt, into the debearder and take it away to be cleaned. So that's on a typical day, we'd be doing any one of those processes, as well as trying to clean grain too. Once you have the malt, then you need to remove the rootlets. So what we do is run it back out through our grain cleaner. It's a series of screens that allow the roots to fall through, and it retains the malt, and then some fans that blow the dust and stuff away. And then we do that outside. So it's augered outside, then augered back inside and bagged. So that would be a typical day. Occasionally we have to bag into 55-pound bags for smaller orders, and even some big customers like small bags for different products. So
Okay.
It's packaging, I guess, would be the other portion of it.
Okay.
Uh,
So, okay. So how many people are on staff over there? Just so I can kind of gauge it, because you said you were a fairly, I mean, you have pretty good footprint on the ground. So how many people on a given day are working there? Since you say you work almost 24-hour, shift, how many people do you have there?
we have two full-time guys. We have 2 to 3 retired guys that come in for 1 hour to 4 hours a day. And then we have one weekend helper that comes out and helps on the weekend. So that's our team there, and a bunch of good guys. So we're very very blessed in that regard.
Cool. Cool. So I'm guessing the malt that you make is pre-ordered, or are you making bulk grain for like brew houses and stuff like that? Are you making it for a specific distillery or brewery or something like that?
So this time last year, we would have been making malt just on the speculation that we will eventually sell this malt. Um, this year, right now, we're making malt that's already has a home for the most part. So we're making, oh, in December, we just laid out our December, which is kind of when you're doing a business where there's a week to start up and a week to shut down. If you have a holiday in November and Christmas in December there, it's by the time you start up, you're shutting down
Yeah.
almost. But I think we'll still crank out about 4 to 5 batches in December. And for the most part, they're all ordered. If we get that fifth one, that would be one to try and get ahead. Um, so right now we're probably, if someone called in something, we'd say that we'd get to it in January, most likely to make it, and it requires about a weekend process and about a 2 week rest. So if someone called in an order, they would be looking at the earliest, maybe late January to early February to receive and use that grain.
And if
Um,
you go ahead. If you had to pick, I'm guessing barley would be your number one seller. Is that correct?
well,
Besides the
rye,
rye.
I think rye is our number one seller now. We've really gone from being brewery based to distillery based. Most all of our production goes to distilleries, and then I guess that's why mostly rye. Um, barley, I really hope single malt takes off because barley is just so much nicer to work with. It malts better. And so I think a lot of times when people think single malt, you think of the Islays and the Highland Scotches that are very peated, very heavily smoky, and having a non smoky single malt's a very nice thing as well. Very delicate,
Mhm,
very flavorful in my opinion. So
mhm.
I hope that takes off. And if people want it smoky, I guess we could do smoky on a large scale. It's just one of those things. If you go that road, that's the road you're on, and it's pretty hard to get off that road because smoke's a very strong flavor that carries through to everything.
Yeah, okay.
Uh,
That was gonna be my next question for you. Being that you're malting the grain, the best part to get that smoke influence, either peat or wood smoke or whatever you want, is in the kilning process. So do you do any of that? Have you done any of that? And like you said, it's a very bold flavor. Does it gum up everything in your kiln to where you have to go through and like, you know, rake it all out and sanitize it or whatever so you can do your next batch? Is it that invasive?
so yes, is a short answer. The so we learned the hard way. I was warned early on not to smoke in my kiln if I intend to do other stuff besides smoke malt. And so I heeded that advice and I smoked my malt outside. I smoked my malt outside on a nice day with the doors open, and some smoke came inside and tainted a batch of Pilsner malt. So we ended up with about, I think that was 7 barrels of a Kolsch that was slightly smoky. It was a very interesting beer. I liked it a lot. That's what we drank for a while. So it every about third sip, you would get a slight smoky flavor. So it was a great beer. The brewer didn't want to put it on because he said, "There's no way we'll be able to replicate this," and I think he's right. But anyway, we traded him the malt for some beer and drank that for a while. So when we smoke, we close the doors, but smoking is done outside and separate from everything else. The way we do it, and this goes to not wanting to taint anything, is we'll take finished malt that's already been cleaned, soak that in water because the malt needs moisture to pick up the smoke flavor compounds. So we soak finished malt in water to get it rehydrated, put it in the smoker, and then smoke it overnight. We might dry it down if someone wants a light smoke. We'll dry it down in the kiln. We do this all on a pilot scale, so about 200 pounds a batch. Our production scale is about 10,000 pounds a batch. So
That's a lot. That's a
there's
lot
really
of
not a
grain.
huge demand for smoked malts yet. Yeah, so we haven't tried smoking at any scale yet. There hasn't been a request yet. Um, that being said, we did build our kiln with our large kiln with the floor drain underneath it so that if we were to do something crazy like smoke 10,000 pounds of malt, we could wash it all down and scrub it down afterwards. So it would be, we wouldn't do that on speculation. That would be something that would be made to order.
Okay. Okay, I was just wondering because I've heard in my general area there's a distillery called Andalusia whiskey, and they smoke their own malt, and so they'll take it and they have a smokehouse, and they basically made it. They have a smoke box to the side, and they have a peated single malt and a like a wood smoked one that they smoke with mesquite and oak and applewood. So it gives a really nice flavor, but for some people it can be a little off-putting, which I understand. And you don't want to taint a batch of beer or something like that if you're making it for a specific client. So I totally get it. And I'm sure those kilns are not cheap to where you would necessitate having a smoke kiln and a regular kiln. So I would think that would be a little expensive. And you said you make 10,000 pounds of grain at one time, malt at one time. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Ooh, that's a lot of grain. That's a lot of grain to go through. So my next question, and then we can wrap it up
It,
if we need
it
to.
sounds
But
like a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, I'm sorry, I stepped on you there.
no,
I was
no,
saying
it's fine.
10,000 sounds like a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, we're about as small as you get. That's put things in perspective. A big malt house might make 600 tons a batch and 2, 3 batches a day.
Oh,
So
God. Uh,
that's a
okay.
large scale.
Yeah, that is a large scale. That is a large scale. So I'm trying to think of my question now. I'm sorry. It'll come to me. Give me a second. What was I gonna say? Good Lord, I didn't write this one down, but it was a good
Oh,
question. Um, crap.
is it related to the smoke malts?
No, it wasn't. It was related to the bat. Oh, in the when you're doing the your floor malting, is that correct?
Correct.
Are you doing that by hand or are you doing it with machinery?
So we have done both. We have a rake that we pull through the grain. We've shoveled the grain, and after doing that a few times, we built a machine very quickly to turn the grain. So it takes about a half hour to 45 minutes to pull the rake through. The rake does a really nice job of spreading the grain. On the first 2 days, raking's fairly easy. It's not difficult. Um, the machine's easier. By the third and fourth day, it's a lot more strenuous to pull the rake. the machine that we built is kind of like a garden rototiller, but with bigger paddles.
Okay.
And so essentially it goes through and turns the grain, and then it has a flap in the back that the grain will eventually lift the flap and go out, but it keeps it in there a little to kind of bust up any clumps and get it cooled down and aerate it. So it works very well. Shoveling, I do think shoveling works the best, but it takes about 2 hours to properly shovel the floor, and versus the 15 to 20 minutes to turn it with the machine. So at midnight, you're not really wanting to go and shovel.
No, I bet not. And then you start to develop the monkey shoulder, like the Scotch, and then that turns into a whole gang of problems. So if I was a home brewer or a home tinkerer in the shed, whatever you want to call it, would I be able to buy your product? Do you have a place where I could go to say, hey, I want to get some malted corn from you or something like that? Could a home brewer or somebody like that buy your product?
Absolutely. So we sell online on our website, cncmalt.com, Charlie November Charlie. So I get a lot of people trying to sell me machine parts, but that stands for custom and craft malt. But yeah, we sell our corn there. We have a lot of Bloody Butcher at the moment. We're about to get a bit of Wapsie Valley. I don't know if we have much malted corn. We're about to do a big batch of the Wapsie Valley because it's really germinating well. And then we'll have some Ohio blue corn in. That's a real nice corn. My favorite was the I'll pronounce it wrong. It starts with the no. It's a green corn.
Oaxacan?
Starts with the no, but it's pronounced with the W. What was that?
Oaxacan?
Yes, I think so. You're breaking up as you're saying it, but
Of course.
I believe that's correct. So that made that best whiskey that I was talking about, my favorite bourbon that's down there. Just malted nicely. It's a beautiful corn. But yeah, we have that in stock from time to time. So it's best to shipping kills a lot of those small orders. So if you're in the neighborhood, stop on in. If not, we could send it across the country.
Okay, cool. Well, while we're talking about that, go ahead and give us any of your socials. You already gave your website and stuff. Go ahead and give us any of your socials and stuff like that. And then I'll try and think of a question while you're doing that.
All right. Well, you won't have much time because I'm not very good with that. I'd have to look. I think we are on Facebook as CNC Malt, and I think we're on Instagram as CNC Malt.
Okay. God dang it. You didn't give me much time.
And my wife's the one that does all that up. So yeah, that's what we got. It's Facebook and Instagram, and I'm pretty sure we're just CNC Malt, nothing too fancy.
Okay. Well, I guess I'm going to wrap it up because I forgot what I was going to ask you. You know, the chemo head's getting to me. So we're going to wrap this one up. But I'm really excited for you guys' future. I feel like hopefully you're going to be ended up having way too many orders and have to get a bigger facility or something. But I really appreciate you coming on here and talking with me and talking to us about malt and kind of giving us the rundown of it. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you for your time. Appreciate being on the show here, and I hope you feel better soon.
Yes, sir. I appreciate it. Stick on real fast. I want to talk to you.
You betcha.
All right. As always, guys, keep your spirits up. Thanks.